Hey everybody, happy Monday. Welcome to a special edition of Why Am I Yelling Live, the Black Lives Matter listening tour. I am Krista Rizzo, your host, and today I'm super excited because my guest, who was supposed to be here a week ago Friday, we were trying to be creative and our creativity got the best of us. So we are going for round two. Today, my guest is Dr. Blanche Wallace. She is formerly a Department of Defense subcontractor and United States Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service. These days, she is changing the game by using innovative, intuitive, and impactful leadership coaching drivers. She has a company called the Strategic Leadership Coaching and Consulting Group, of Dynamic Strategic Leadership Coaching and Consulting Group. Sorry, I missed the first word. And she coaches executives and CEOs to become better leaders in their organizations. I'm excited to have her here. We met through a mutual friend of ours because I want to know all the things that she has to say about Black Lives Matter, racial injustice, and all the things that we are going through on a global scale. So first, thank you for being here. It's so good to see your face again.
Thank you, Krista. I'm so excited to be here with you. And yes, we learned our lesson, so we will behave. And really, it's an honor to be here with you, contemplating ways to promote racial healing. Because the events on May 25th, when the nation watched the tragic death of George Floyd, it questioned the value that society places on brown and Black people in America. So then we find ourselves in a situation where America is being torn at its core. And I feel like we are in a spiritual battle, and one that takes a strength that exceeds our physical capabilities, as well as a wisdom that exceeds our finite knowledge. But more importantly, brokenness of heart. Because as we experience this pain individually, then that is what allows us to heal collectively. And I firmly believe that as we work together, we can promote the healing that our nation needs. America has been in need of rescuing for a long time. But before we get too far in the session, I just want to invite the audience to take a moment of silence with us as we honor two great social justice leaders, and that's Congressman John Robert Lewis and Dr. C.T. Vivian.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment. I was so re-inspired watching the memorial service of Congressman John Lewis, and I was so proud of our former presidents and the words that they shared and the unity that was displayed. And I kept thinking to myself, if nothing else, the word of God is really going forth today. And so having said that, I know that my bio reviews my business credentials, but the real work that I actually do is called ministry. Because in a lot of circles, I am known as the bishop's daughter. And so my objective today really is to instill and inspire hope. And then I defer again to Congressman John Lewis. He left us with these words of encouragement. Be hopeful, be optimistic, and never lose a sense of hope. And so for our audience today, that's my message in a nutshell. Never lose a sense of hope.
I love that you're saying that because, we've been having conversations for the last several weeks, just the two of us. And it's been so lovely to get to know you on a more personal level. And I feel like prior to us coming live for the second time, hope was always something that we both talked about, right? We have hope and we have belief and we have faith that working together is going to help create this change. And I could not agree with you more. I watched on Friday as well. And several times I cried, my breath was taken away. It was just a really beautiful celebration of life to a man who was so deserving of that celebration and who had really contributed to the change up to this point in time where we are. And I feel like it's our responsibility to take that lead and keep moving forward with it. So, the general consensus right now, though, is that people are angry. There are people out there who are angry. They are frustrated. They're acting out, right? And so how do we need to respond to that line of thinking, right? And do you agree or disagree with the perception that is out there?
Excellent questions. I actually believe that passion is erroneously being labeled as anger. Passion is expressed in a variety of ways and through many different behaviors. But what I also feel is that the emotions that emerge from injustice, oppression, discrimination encompass a lot more than just anger. For example, feelings of hurtfulness or anxiety or confusion or insecurity and even hopelessness. And so I think it's really important for people to do three things. First of all, take a step back and then just take the time to really be present in the moment and identify what you're really feeling. And some of the ways that you can do that are simply by just closing your eyes and allowing yourself to feel the feelings that are emerging in your mind, in your body, in your spirit. And really focus in on the area of the body that's feeling stressed. For example, the clenching of your teeth, closing of your fists, throbbing in your temple, or that little nervousness that tingled in your stomach. And so then zoom in on your thoughts. And when you have identified what it is you're really feeling, then embrace it. Just feel it. And once you embrace it and identify what it is, then name it. Because once we name emotion, then we can effectively manage emotion. And managed emotion can then be constructively transformed into positive thoughts, actions, or behavior, and then expressed in a healthy manner.
So how do we, when you say harness and manage emotion, how do we do that specifically?
Well, when we think about what a healthy thought feels like, I want to introduce the concept of self-talk. Self-talk are those silent thoughts that we entertain in our minds. And in this case, Krista, self-talk influences our feelings and our perceptions about different races and ethnic groups. And so one of the ways that I suggest that we begin to harness and manage these emotions is, first of all, think about an individual from a different ethnic group. And then just stop and ask yourself, what I really know about that person.
Right.
Then be daring enough to do it again. Then pause and reflect. Because see, after you have repeated this process, then you're becoming racially aware. Those thoughts that are coming to you, you're able to transform them into words. And so then you have a responsibility to explore the why. Why do I feel this way about this ethnic group? And so another strategy that I think will be really, really helpful is to then enter into a relationship with someone from a different culture. I mean, a real relationship, not a work relationship, one that is authentic. Because when you were going through this mental activity, ask yourself, did I see a person or did I see a race? Because when we see and we conceptualize a person, then we humanize the individual. That's a big difference. That is vast, it's huge, and it influences our perspective. Because when we begin to see people as people, and we engage into these relationships with them, then we are to enter into the relationship with the mindset that every individual, every person deserves dignity and respect. Because dignity and respect are basic emotional needs, much the same way as food, air, and water are basic human needs. When we do that, we're well on the way overcoming these biases and these perspectives.
I think that is so interesting and so spot on, right? Because, you know, a lot of us are, or a lot of cultures are not raised to intermix with other cultures, right? And so now we live in a world that is so diverse. I live in New York City, probably one of the most diverse places on the planet, right? And I think that for me, it has, and I'm raising two children there. So I feel like we are contributing and being responsible to humanity by engaging and incorporating our kids and ourselves into the mix, right? We live in a very multicultural neighborhood. We take the train pre-COVID, we did a lot more interacting with people on the streets, right? But I think that when you live in places where it's a little bit harder, you have to think outside the box and you have to step out of your comfort zone, and you have to, right now it's a great time to learn and educate yourself. And so you have to like literally go in search for these relationships or this learning opportunity, right? Whether it is reading a book or listening to a podcast or going to a different organization and volunteering there, where there are people who are not like you, who don't have the same color of your skin or have the same cultural background or ethnic background, right? How has your family background influenced your perspective on racism and the current climate in our country?
I love the way that you framed this question and then the backdrop from it, because I also believe that we are in a day and time when we must be intentional about growing away from racism. And I really believe that I had a head start with this because I actually come from a blended family. My mom is African American and part Native American, and her father is all Native American, whereas my biological father is African American, but my stepfather, the man who raised me, is African American and half Irish, and his mom is full Irish. And so growing up together in our household, yes, we are the epitome of a blended family. But we were just raised as sisters and brothers. We didn't know anything about stepsisters and stepbrothers until literally we went to school. But having said that, because my father was half Caucasian, we spent a lot of time with Caucasian families. And likewise, we spent a lot of time with African American families. And so I really think that coming from this composite, this background, my parents helped to instill a growth mindset in me. And the real benefit from this derived when I entered into the business world. And so again, I cannot afford to harbor feelings of ill will toward other ethnic groups coming from the type of family that I came from. And so as I entered into the business world, I did not, and I still do not, allow myself to be intimidated because the majority of the audience looks different than I do. Most of the time, I represent two minorities, African American and women. I also was just comfortable just being who I am. And so I think that I had a head start. And I'm probably one of the more fortunate ones. And so I kind of grew up with this open mindset. Now, Jack Welch, he describes this ability to be comfortable in your own skin. He labels that as emotional intelligence. Yes. Emotional intelligence involves being both self-aware and socially aware of the environment, aware of other people's perceptions, their responses to you, your behaviors, your speech. I also feel, and this is so relevant for our current environment, I also feel that emotional intelligence is an effective anti-racism competency, because the more self-aware we are, the more socially aware we are, we're able to close that divide. We're able to connect with one another on an individual level. I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. It happened to be a DNI roundtable, and one of the participants made the statement that he worked with an African American lady that was having some challenges, and he was saying, I really can't relate to what it feels like to be an African American woman. And I thought about that, but afterwards I said, but there are common feelings that we can all relate to. We can all relate to feelings of rejection. We can all
Yep.
relate to feelings of being hurt. We can all relate to being disrespected. So if we leverage the commonalities that we have, then that helps us to grow to a place where we can be more empathetic authentically. Because saying, okay, I'm not in that place where you are, but the feelings that emerged, I can relate to that.
This is not something we talked about last time. So I love this because you're bringing up a really valid, of course, a valid point, but an important point, right? Uh, of course, I'm never going to know what it's like to be a Black woman, but I do know what it's like to be a woman. I know what it's like to be, you know, in toxic environments at work. I know what it's like to be sexually harassed. I know what it's like. I know all these things. And I'm sure that there are people, if you are not one of those people, who have experienced that, who are a different color than me, different cultures, different background, different religion. So I love that you are taking that and you're not allowing it to be an excuse.
Exactly.
Right? I feel like people can oftentimes use the excuse, well, I will never know what it's like to be a Black man in an inner city. You're right. I never will because I'm a white woman and I don't live, in an inner city. But I know what it's like to be afraid sometimes, and I know what it's like to be stressed out, and I know what it's like, you know what I mean? So I think that takes away the inability to push it off and say, well, I have no idea what that feels like, so I can't relate to you. The relatability it merges somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And see, the other thing for me, coming from the background that I came from, when I'm in these environments where the audience is primarily white, it's not that I don't see the difference in the skin tones. I just don't allow it to be a
Yeah,
barrier. I just don't allow it to
right.
be a problem, even now. When we connect on the human level, when we recognize and embrace and value the human capacities, capabilities, characteristic features of one another, then the barriers are diminished.
Yes, right. So talk to me about the barriers that perpetuate racism. And we just talked about how we can overcome them a little bit, but expand on that just a little bit more for me.
Okay. And so earlier I talked about entering into relationships with people of different ethnicities. And so the significance of that is when you cultivate healthy relationships, then they facilitate emotional healing. And so I really want to clarify this. I want to create
Yeah.
a picture in everybody's mind. So I also teach, and one of my students, he wrote about his response to the events on May 25th.
Yep.
And he said, I had no idea that my brothers, and he was talking about his African American friends. He said, I had no idea that my brothers were being treated this way. I thought everybody had access to the same resources and to the same privileges. And then he kind of paused in his writing and he said, this hurts my heart. What I love most about the millennial and the Generation Z populations is their authenticity, as well as their sense of justice. And so I believe that people of all races should become involved in a fight against systemic racism because we have a moral obligation to use our voices in the community, in the workplace, in the schools, in government, in society. And when we fail to use our voices, then we in essence become a part of the problem. So when we were connected and you shared with me the objective of your platform, I was so excited about that. Because the only way that we're going to influence authentic change is together. And the only way that we can march hand in hand together is we have to come to know one another. So, in essence, I guess what I'm saying is I'm encouraging the audience to do just what you and I are doing. We are cultivating an authentic relationship and we focus on our commonalities, but we're also daring enough to talk about our differences and open-minded enough to understand one another's perspective. So those are some of the ways that we can overcome these barriers to racism.
I love that. And I love that we know people who are willing to open the conversations and have these, and quite frankly, some of them are quite uncomfortable, right? I mean, you and I are having a comfortable conversation because we've conversed before and we've had conversations before. But if you're walking into a room and you don't necessarily know somebody, or you're walking into a conversation or an experience, it can feel intimidating. So I feel like encouraging people to have these conversations with people that they know first is a good idea, before you take it out to the street, or bring it somewhere where you're standing on your platform and you're really making your voice heard, which I agree with 100%. So is there somebody that inspires you to do those kinds of things?
Besides just my relationship with Christ, yes. I think I just love people really. And so it's a natural for me. But when we think about the response to May 25th and our younger generations are rioting, a lot of people are opposed to that. Yeah. And even though our forefathers, our social justice advocate for peaceful demonstrations, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Instead of opposing the actions that the younger generations are taking and their zealousness, I began praying and asking God to send a leader, somebody who could provide the structure needed to advance the message of social reform. And so I actually believe that I have met that person in Pastor John Gray. Pastor John Gray partners with Joel Osteen in Houston, Texas, but then he also pastors a church in South Carolina.
Okay, and so why John Gray? What is he doing that is so inspirational and hopeful to you, since we're going to keep talking about hope?
Yeah. Pastor John Gray, again, not only partners with Joel Osteen, but he pastors a culturally diverse church. So imagine this, an African-American pastor that's pastoring white people, Black people, Asian people successfully, and they're following him. But Pastor John Gray is educated and he is informed. But the characteristic that I think is the most dynamic and the most appealing that can draw and connect with the younger generations is he is peacefully radical. If you ever see him speak, you will just be so mesmerized. And he has such an expansive vocabulary, but then he is able to speak slang, to speak the language, and just really motivate people. That's what a leader does. A leader motivates and inspires people around a common goal. And so I believe that the King mantle and the social justice baton has been handed off to Pastor John Gray.
I love that. And now everybody needs to go check out Pastor John Gray. When we first met, you and I were having a conversation. And this was back when I first started this Black Lives Matter listening tour project that I'm doing. And you're not my first guest, you're number 7 at this point. But I remember asking you, and I'm inspired now because of the explanation of Pastor Gray, right? He's a Black man who is preaching to a culturally diverse audience. I was questioning whether or not I had the right to do something similar, right? Do I have the right as a white woman to be talking about Black Lives Matter in the way that I want to do it, in a way that is informative and educational and non-invasive, but a little bit maybe controversial and uncomfortable, because I think that's where the change starts, right? You can't stay in your comfort zone if you're expecting change to happen. And my question to you literally was, is it okay if I do this?
And my response, and I'm even more convinced, is absolutely. Because first of all, you're facilitating the platform from one of curiosity. It's really important for us to become curious about people from other ethnic groups. But then that growth mindset where you're open, you're willing to learn, you're willing to allow yourself to be influenced and change. Because when we change, our perspectives, our behaviors change, and when our behaviors change, then our decisions change. So yes, absolutely. Because again, the only way that we're going to influence and motivate positive change is together. I also feel that we are in a God moment. This is a defining moment for us that I feel that we have been entrusted with to do exactly what we're talking about, to facilitate positive change. And so I encourage all the listeners to work together to create systems that are better aligned, systems that are cohesive and synergistic. Why? Because racial and economic injustice are linked together in much the same way as diversity and inclusion. And one without the other produces brokenness. When we can come together collectively as human beings, as people on the earth, then our spirits, our hearts, and our America can be healed. I firmly believe that. And so I'm going to divert again just for a minute, because at Congressman John Lewis's funeral, you saw at times arm in arm Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George Bush, arm in arm. There were pictures taken afterwards where you saw George Bush and Michelle Obama head to head. Connection, unity. That's a vision before us. And so then I'm also reminded and inspired by Dr. C.T. Vivian's words when he said, realistically speaking, the only way that we're going to save ourselves is by working together. The only way we can save ourselves politically, physically, and spiritually is by working together. So yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that you have every right. And I commend you for being courageous enough to undergird this initiative. And I thank you for allowing me a voice on your show today.
Oh my gosh, it's been my pleasure to have you here. I think that's like the best way to end, actually. Because like there's, what else are we gonna say? I mean, I'm sure we can find things to say, but you know, this message of hope and of peace and of creating relationships, right? We just talked about, you know, former presidents who are all from different places and different backgrounds and getting together and supporting each other, regardless of whether or not they might believe the same things or different things politically or economically or whatever. That to me was very inspirational when I saw that last week. And it always is when I see that, right? When you see world leaders coming together and creating relationships outside of their jobs, right? Outside of their duties and their responsibilities. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that was really special. Dr. Blanche Wallace, I love you, and I'm so glad you were here with me today. You are a national treasure. I really appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your message of hope. It is one that our viewers are going to take a lot away from with. And you guys can follow her on all the places. I'm going to put her information in the comment section of this conversation so you can get to know Dr. Wallace a lot better, because I have, and I am much better for it. So thank you for being here. Thank you guys for watching. And we will see you back here for another episode of Why Am I Yelling soon.
Have a great day.